Welcome back. Well, let's turn our attention to Zimbabwe now, where there are worrying signs as Zanu-PF and the MDC are yet to agree on an election date. Well, there have been reports of voter registration controversies already, and now it seems Zimbabwe's history of clamping down on journalists and outspoken activists is resurfacing. Well, just how safe are journalists in that country ahead of the polls? So joining us in studio is Tiseke Kasambala from the Human Rights Watch. A very good morning to you. A huge pleasure to have you with us. The arrest of eNCA and editor Dumisani Muleya, not an isolated incident, especially if you take a look at the recent arrest of Beatrice Mtetwa. What I want to know from you this morning, is this a sign of things to come in the build-up to the elections?
Certainly, over the past year, we've seen increasing attacks by the police against civil society activists, including human rights defenders and journalists, as well as human rights lawyers. So yes, it's a sign of things to come, and we remain seriously concerned by the fact that in the build-up to this particular election, we're seeing yet again Zanu-PF, the Zimbabwe police, trying to prevent people from being critical of the government and reporting on what's going on the ground in Zimbabwe.
The report in question here has a lot to do with Morgan Tsvangirai and his interaction with General there, Chiwenga, allegedly asking for assurances that if he would win the election, there wouldn't be any violence. And that fallout is what has led to a tense environment there in Zimbabwe. We know that the general has called the Prime Minister a hallucinating psychiatric case.
Well, that's just a sign of where the Zimbabwe security services, which are comprised of the army, the police, and the Central Intelligence Organization, stand when it comes to elections in Zimbabwe. They are not neutral. They are highly partisan towards Zanu-PF and President Robert Mugabe, and they were involved in serious violations in the 2008 elections. So for us, these type of partisan, highly partisan and inflammatory comments are just a sign of what the army is capable of doing ahead of elections this year. And that's why we feel that the international community should be paying close attention to this, in particular the South African government.
Well, you say the writing is on the wall now. This is a sign of things to come. What should the international community do?
Well, one of the things we've been calling for is before any elections take place, the South African government should be putting pressure on the Zimbabwean government to initiate security sector reforms in the country. Security sector reform is one of the biggest issues right now as we stand in Zimbabwe. The fact that the security services have made it clear that they would not support or salute Morgan Tsvangirai if he were to win these elections. The fact that they've been involved in violations of human rights in the past means that something needs to be done to address the situation. But to date, Zanu-PF has refused to initiate any sort of reforms of the security sector in Zimbabwe.
And what do you make of South Africa's quiet diplomacy when it comes to Zimbabwe?
Well, they need to step up this quiet diplomacy. It shouldn't be as quiet anymore. As I said, I think security sector reform is a key one, and if this doesn't happen, we're not likely to see peace in Zimbabwe at all in the build-up to these elections.
Taking a look at the issue of free speech in Zimbabwe, the arrest of the journalist, I want to look at the profession itself. It seems that we're seeing criminal law being used against the profession of journalism in Zimbabwe. Take the case of the recent arrest that I just mentioned a little earlier. We know that they were arrested for, I'm quoting here, publishing falsehoods and publishing statements that are prejudicial to the state. In terms of Zimbabwe's criminal law, is the law now being used against people speaking their minds?
The law has always been used in Zimbabwe against people speaking their mind, and that's been one of the problems, one of the things that we've been calling for in terms of reforms before elections. In Zimbabwe, they have the Public Order and Security Act and the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act that criminalize critical reporting by journalists. And so journalists who are perceived to have published falsehoods, as you say there, are liable to fines and even prison. So it's a serious issue, it's a serious situation for us. It chills the environment in Zimbabwe and prevents journalists from reporting on what's going on in the country. Effectively, it's there to shut down the country. And that's a problem. And
in reinstilling fear that people should not be able to speak against President Robert Mugabe, should not try and dissent in any way, that fear also among the voters.
It's a form of intimidation. It says that, you know, we can go out there and abuse you with impunity. No one is going to report on it because we're going to prevent that sort of reporting. No one is going to come and save you. If you don't vote for Mugabe, you're in trouble. And journalists who play such a critical role in this type of reporting are now scared. It definitely chills the environment for that type of reporting in the country.
Is it too far gone to try and make amends and make things right before people cast their ballots?
No, it's not too far gone. They haven't even announced a date for the elections yet. So that's why we're saying that elections shouldn't be held before some of these critical issues are addressed. You know, a free press, the right to freedom of expression and association, the right for people to go and assemble, the fact that the security sector needs to be put in place to ensure that all the police and the army remain neutral. All these things are things that need to be addressed before any sort of election date is set, before any elections take place. And the South Africans who are key facilitators for this are very well aware of this, and they need to be pushing more. They need to push Robert Mugabe and his party to do more, to open up the environment so that people can freely vote for a person of their choosing.
Loved chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time. Tiseke Kasambala from the Human Rights Watch.
News that moves. eNCA.com.